say, hey, welcome everybody to the NerdBrand Podcast, where we debate things like parkways and driveways and why are they named that, and you don't do the action on one or the other. Anyway, check. You can rewind the cold open on that one, maybe. We'll see.
Or not.
Or not. Yeah. Anyways, today we're talking about why create a brand style guide. This is something that, as we have been going back and forth through the lands, I think, and doing what we do as an agency. I was just thinking,
wandering the frozen tundra.
Yeah, it feels like that we, over the last, because somebody said that, I don't know, you and I maybe we're talking to someone, and it felt like it has been a century or something, and it's like, no, that was like 5 months ago. But then we're just sitting there going like, wow, it's 5 months ago. That's all it was. It feels like it's 3 or 4 times that amount of time.
Yeah, that's what we had yesterday with the client we were meeting.
Yeah.
I mean, we met them in September, or you all met them in September, and it feels like eons ago.
That was the last time we'd actually seen one another.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. A lot has happened with us, and of course 5 months ago was the St. Matthews Chamber of Commerce Expo, which they are going to do again this year. And I'm not allowed to say what the theme is, but I know what the theme is, so we got plenty of time to prep, and it's kind of funny. So we appreciate Josh and Kristen over there and all the things that they do, and Elizabeth. And it's one of those events that, you know, if you're in the chamber, you should definitely go. We have gotten out of it clients, friends,
acquaintances,
employees.
Strategic partners, a lot of that.
Yeah.
Vendors.
So it's definitely worth it. Didn't mean to plug them as the opening here, as the ad for the chamber, but there you go, Josh. You owe me one.
need to do the opening too.
Yeah. But yes, I am. I think by now everybody knows who I am.
Never assume.
Never. Well, sure.
Never
All
assume.
right. Well, I'm Jason Davis. And this is the NerdBrand Podcast. This is Mitch, and that's John.
Hello.
Hey,
Where'd the finger guns go?
I know the last
That's
couple of
2
episodes.
I like to mix it up.
No, you
I do the
don't.
wave. I do the finger guns.
That's not a wave. That's like a
Top of the morning to you.
top of the morning to you.
That's called.
We should stop with
That's doffing
We
your
really
hat.
need to stop with the accents, I think.
It's doffing a hat, governor.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like we
They just turned it off.
Yeah, I just feel like everybody's just like, you know what?
Never
Done.
mind.
Yeah. Anyways, let's break down and discuss the importance and why of each points and parts of a brand guide. We're not, of course, not all inclusive. Like there's only so much time we have to do this, so let's go through this as best we can, as brief we can, from respect for our listeners.
Yep.
Why you
And
should strongly consider adding and having these things in your brand.
Why?
guide.
Well, and why should you have a brand guide?
Period. Yeah. So I will let Mitch briefly describe and explain whatever you want to say. Why do we need a brand guide, Mitch? What for? What's that about?
Well, I'll say this. I'm going to say this right off the bat. If you could be a business so small where it doesn't matter, okay? But if you are a brand who's competing with other brands, and you probably are, the way you differentiate yourself from your competitors is vitally important. A brand guide basically is a step toward establishing that footprint that's unique from your competitors, because it includes your logo, the colors your brand employs, the fonts and the fonts or typefaces that identify who you are, and to get even more deeper into it, what your brand sounds like. You know, what kind of language do you use when your brand expresses itself in the larger world? What is it that your brand promises that's different than your competitors? And what are those qualities, those almost human qualities, if you will, that make up the personality of who your brand is? Again, each of these things are pieces of who your brand is that separates you from your competitors. So having a brand guide that nails this down, that basically plants your flag and says, this is who we are, and this is how we represent ourselves, is of vital importance in making you stand alone in a marketplace that's probably fairly crowded, depending on what your brand does.
Yeah, because I mean, as you are operating your business or whatever part that you have in it, time passes, like we said at the beginning, and then you kind of, maybe need a reference to go back to. And if it doesn't exist, then you kind of perpetually, none of us can talk.
Perpetuate?
Thank you. Changes, revisions, because everybody's got an imagination, and it's happening constantly, and then you look back and you've just got this mess actually, and nobody really recognizes it anymore if they actually just pause for a second and look at it. So, John, you look like you were going to say something.
Well, there's the differentiation, and then there's the execution of your brand strategy and your marketing strategy. If your web team doesn't have this thing, if your social media team doesn't have this document to refer to when they're creating graphics or writing copy, again, it's just going to get kind of mishmashed. You're going to have different people doing different things, but they don't have these guardrails or this North Star to kind of come back to as a unit. And so your marketing, your advertising, eventually, it's not immediate, but over a couple of years, if you're running different campaigns and different people are in charge, you're going to get conflict, you're going to get inconsistency, and that's the bane of any brand.
Yeah, because people's natural inclination is to do what they think is best.
Sure.
I think we should do it this way.
Yeah.
Well,
especially design and all that. You have a certain artistic style. Everybody does.
Mm-hmm. Right. I like the color green, so I think I'm going to use the color green. Where nowhere in your brand, nowhere in how your brand has represented itself in the world has there ever been green?
I mean,
I just use that as an example, but that's a very common. There's a practical aspect to this. It's not some kind of high lofty thing that just looks nice that you set on a shelf. It's like, I've got a brand guide. Mm-hmm. We're important. No, it's very practical. It's all about having a singular, unified message that you broadcast to the world about who you are, what you do, and why it's good.
Yeah, anybody that's managing your brand or any of the channels in marketing that it's going out on, and they're not using that as the guide to establish proper use of the logo and imagery, that's a mistake, because it's just, I don't know. I feel like it's shotgunning the internet and hoping something sticks.
Yeah.
And,
it's hoping for magic.
Yeah.
Right. And there is no, not to say luck doesn't sometimes come into play, but generally speaking, there's no magic. It's everything has to be intentional. I find I've been using that word a lot lately.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Everything has to be intentional. Everything you create about who you are, everything that you put out there into the world that represents you, needs to have an intent. What is the end goal you want to accomplish?
Yeah, and you've actually just defined one of our attributes, which when we say strategic, like our attributes are strategic and creative. And somebody said, well, every agency says that. Yes, but we're not using that word and then pulling the definition from a dictionary. You kind of define that. I mean, you have to start with that before you get to the creative part. The strategic part it's so important.
Oh, yeah.
Because in a business sense, that's where, for business owners, that's where the money burns. That's where you start to you might as well just light $100 bills on fire if you haven't done that yet. We had somebody that we met. They were very appreciative of us telling them to pump the brakes.
Slow down.
Yeah, and we didn't really want to. We hinted at budget because it is a conversation that has to happen. But, we don't know what we're doing yet. So let's not, we don't have to put that at the top of the pile. Again, John, you look like you were going to say something. You just kind of eyeballing.
You're good. I'm watching you. I'm listening.
All right. Well, anyway, and to what you were saying about color, I've had the conversations about that and understanding and explaining, I'm going to tread carefully here, John, because you're going to know exactly who I'm talking about.
I won't tell anybody.
One of the colors was yellow in the brand, and it wasn't exactly a yellow, like a bright safety yellow. It was sort of like, dingy yellow. I'll just say that.
A dull, not a bright yellow, a dull yellow.
Yeah, thank you. We'll go with that. Yeah, it looked like they had jaundice maybe. But anyway, the point is that when they ordered coffee cups, that's when it looked like safety yellow. The coffee cups came in with the brand color on there. It was just like, type yellow. So you kind of get into your materials that you want to produce. And then imagine going to a trade show and you got your pop-ups and you got all these different colors. I mean, especially... Hopefully you're not using a blinding color like that, but imagine how that looks when you say we're a creative agency or we do any form of design. And it's like, what color should I look at? What is it you want me to look at? Because the message, the words that may be on that item, they are lost.
Talking about the practical side of this. I was thinking about this when I was looking over the show notes last night and this morning. And it's like, there are logos in the branding universe, probably more than not, that aren't what you would actually call attractive, or they're old, or they're dated. But, and I'm going to throw a wrench in the works a little bit, it matters more for some brands than others because there are issues that come into play, things like we talk about brand equity.
Mm-hmm.
If people are just accustomed to seeing you in a certain light, in a certain fashion, and they're comfortable with it, you have to tread very carefully about, okay, well, let's change it.
Mm-hmm.
Or let's do anything that deviates from what people are. They have a comfort level with our brand. There's things they come to expect. And that's your logo. That's part of what your logo represents. Now, I'll be the first one to tell people that a lot of times there's a lot of overemphasis in the importance of the logo itself because the logo has one purpose. It's your thumbprint. And it's unique and it stands out from the crowd. If you've done that, you've done 80% of the work it's supposed to do.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And for some reason, clients get very, very, very hung up on changing a logo or the aesthetic aspects of a logo. I mean, it's like sometimes we've been in situations where we've met with a new client who has an established brand and we look at their stuff and within the scheme of what they want to be and where they want to go, that logo just doesn't work. And it's like telling somebody, I'm sorry, your baby is ugly.
Yeah.
And I hate having to have that conversation because people, for some reason, personalize it so much. Oh, you're going to change my logo? You might as well be turning my hair green.
I mean, I think a big reason that happens is they're not really aware, because if they're not in branding, marketing, if they've not been in those fields, they don't know the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
That there's other stuff to be focused on and there's other stuff to think about and define. Yeah, everybody's familiar with logos.
Yeah.
They don't really think about how a logo comes to be. They don't think about the 7, 8, 9, 10 other core things that make up a brand architecture and experience.
There's an overemphasis for some reason. And I guess this goes back ages. There's an overemphasis on what you expect that logo to do for you. There's this image in people's head. Well, that's I think people actually believe, and maybe for some brands it does to a certain degree, but I think there's a belief that it is actually that logo is selling product.
Mm-hmm.
I can sit here after 20 plus years in the business, and I can't think of an instance where I think that's actually been the case. If somebody out there listening or watching can tell me, oh wait, I've got an instance where 1998 XYZ, put it in the comments. I want to see it. But bottom line, as long as that logo is a strong visual indication of who you are, that identifies you in a unique fashion, so it doesn't look just like your competitors. It makes you stand out from your competitors and is easy to recognize.
And the name is legible.
The name is clear. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's number one.
It's important.
The name is clear. Everything else is secondary. The colors to some degree. The font used to some degree. Number one is the name clear. Then you start building the colors, and this is where it gets into the other aspects of what goes in the brand guide.
Yeah, there's a reason the logo's at the top.
Right. But see, the funny thing is all of those things go into why the logo looks the way it does. Right. And I come from a school of thought where a lot of times, more often than not, the simpler the logo, the better, because people recognize it more quickly if it's uncomplicated.
Well, I can give you a great example about utility of the logo. You have to have different ways because you're going to use it in different mediums. I know somebody that's in the signage business, and it's like you may want to do a vinyl sign on glass. Well, if the font typeface of the logo is thin, the installer is going to go and install it, but when they peel off that backing, it comes right off with it. And now it's ruined, and they got to go back to the shop, reprint it, and try to figure out how to apply it. So your brand standards can say, okay, well, here's the logo, because you basically will do a color version, and then you do a white, and then you do just an all black out version.
Maybe.
Usually,
at least one that works in grayscale.
Exactly. And then you have, and I told you before, sometimes it's just easier to say what not to do with the logo than what to do, because the brand guide is a living, breathing document. Maybe you're like, well, I don't really have the money for signage right now. Well, then it doesn't need to go into the brand guide. We don't need to waste the time on it. But if you have the plans to in the future, then you're going to update that document.
Yeah, your brand guide, depending on the size and business. I mean, if you're just starting out and you only need your branding applied in a limited number of areas, then your brand guide isn't a voluminous thing, okay? Basically, what you're doing, first of all, is establishing rules internally, but also externally, like what you're talking about, for how you apply it so that everybody's singing the same song. It's like a chorus. Everybody's on key and everything harmonizes and everything's working. And to your point, there's very practical applications to this. Why you both, I mean, if a logo has fonts in it or elements that are too thin so that when it gets to a certain size, they disappear.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You haven't done anybody any favors if you've designed a logo that way. I mean, you design, and a lot of kids coming out of school, I say kids, come up out of school and they'll design cool things that look good this big.
Yeah. Because everybody focuses on a website.
And you make it that big.
Social media.
You make it that big,
Right.
like if it's going to go on a cup or if it's going to go on material where other brands may appear, it's got to work that way too.
Yeah, that gets into when you think about a logo, for those listening, you have to think about the adaptability of that logo. And a while back, I posted something about Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola's full logo will not fit on the top of a bottle cap. So they have a different way or standard for that logo to be used for that particular medium.
Right.
So there are different ways as your business progresses and grows. You know, I think most brand guides we do probably 5-6 pages. Mostly,
it can be 5 pages.
Yeah, I mean, because most of them we deal with are starting out and they're very new to this, and they're like, okay, for years we've had all this with marketing, and then they arrive at our doorstep and they're like, oh, you guys come first. Oh, that's why. And it's just like light bulbs keep going off. And so, but we've dealt with brand guides and we have received brand guides. John, you've received brand guides from other places for brands that we manage. It's 40 something pages.
Oh, Lord.
So, you know, they exist. I got a hold of one of a water district out west that was like 88, 89 pages. And the project was up for RFP to revise. Yeah. Now that's a whole year project, and it could be expanding to 120 pages and the reason I believe this is, and Mitch, you'll probably agree with this, is that the size of the organization from a revenue and employee standpoint has grown, and there's more activity and things happening that require the definitions of, okay, well, here's what it looks like on a cup. And you're like, why are we doing that? Because tomorrow we're going to put it on a billboard, and you can't put the cup stuff on the billboard stuff.
Well, I mean, you're right. I mean, you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I mean, the size of your brand guide is in direct proportion to how large your brand is and in how many different universes it exists. If you're a brand that's doing a lot of sponsorships, if you do a lot of premium materials and items, if other people are going to need access to your branding to help to cross promote or something of that nature, then the more involved your brand guide is going to need to be. If you're doing a lot of television or broadcast media, your brand guide's going to contain a lot more information, because not only are you outlining practical things like fonts, colors, and you need to tell people, this is what you need to tell people in detail. This is the language you use. These are the words you use for our brand, and you include an example of all these things. So yeah, to your point, I mean, I for a long time I did work for a healthcare, one of the largest healthcare companies in the world, as a client. And yeah, their brand guide was hundreds of pages. But that's because there's lots of different ways that their brand gets expressed in a lot of different mediums.
Plus the highly regulatory, like there's regulations to adhere to.
Well, yeah, right. That's a whole other side to it.
You've got different service lines and product lines that require a different look and feel. They're for a different audience, so you have to have different standards for that. If you're, like you were saying, it's not just creative stuff. It's not just creative standards. If you're writing a radio script, do we have an excited person reading the script? Do we have a formal tone? Do we have a fun tone? Or are we just silly? Stupid?
Yeah,
I mean that is defined in the brand guide.
Right. You were talking about how in the brand guide we often give people examples of what not to do with the logo, simply because those are the most common ways that people screw it up.
And it's not intentional. I think the important thing is, as your business grows, you're going to have to rely on outside partners. You can't do everything in-house. So you're going to have to rely on outside printers. You're going to have to rely on outside media vendors, all of that stuff. If you don't have this thing to hand them, and if they're not respectful of it, that's the other piece, is to pick your vendors well, so that they know even if you forget to send it, they might ask you, do you have a brand guide? Hopefully they do.
Yeah.
Right.
We've been all over this this list as far as that. Brand, logo, colors, typography, imaging, tone, promise, and attributes. When you're talking about that, the vendors, I mean, the imaging that's used, the pictures that are used often aren't thought of to be appropriate for that channel. A picture you would use on your website is probably not the best to use on social media, on LinkedIn, like Facebook or that. Like, you have to think about the intentionalness of that. Like
The channel.
Yeah, and web is in layers. So we're going to put words on top of stuff, and that's clickable. You can do stuff with it. The image in the background is not necessarily as important as what's in the layer at the very top.
Right.
Because that's the call to action. That's what makes the monies. But the image needs to still be taken and thought of in a way that if I look on this on any device or whatever, that somebody's face isn't squished when they get to mobile, or it isn't like obstructed. Like, if you can just look at a professional print ad in a magazine, and how many of those images of the models or the product, how many of those have copy that is running over the top of it, or you don't see that because they paid a lot of money for that model to be in that shot. That's why.
Well, I mean, every brand has its own way of doing these things. I mean, some are more avant-garde than others. But that's a lot of. I mean, sometimes you'll hear a brand guide referred to as a brand and style guide, an identity guide. I mean, it's just basically you don't want to leave anything into question and how you communicate your brand in any visual or broadcast fashion. The tone of your copy is this, and you have an example. There's certain you're talking about highly regulated businesses, and we've worked with those before too. Sometimes you can't use these type of, you tell them you don't use these type of words, you don't use these type of languages, you never do this, you never do that. In heavily regulated businesses, that's vitally important.
And here's what you must include, like working with bourbon. There's responsibility statements that have to be on the website. They have to be on all the print materials. It has to be, legible. It has to be a certain size. All that kind of stuff. The required language when you get into those fields is in the brand guide as well.
All that's included.
Yeah.
I mean, fast food. If you get and you go out to the mailbox, you get a big sheet of coupons from a fast food restaurant. You turn it over you've got the offer, you turn it on the back, there's all this teeny tiny 6-point, 5-point type, legal, what we call legalese.
Yeah.
That's got to be there. That is outlined in your brand guide. There will be a page in Arby's or somebody's brand guide, I'm sure, that talks about how you treat couponing. And it will break down every element on that coupon and how you treat it, because it's a legal factor. So there's more to having a brand guide. For some businesses, this isn't important for others, but for a lot of businesses, it's just as important to have those kind of things in your brand guide as it is to tell people exactly what your colors are for print, digital, whether it's four-color process, spot color process. All of those things are outlined because you pretend you're giving. You always want to assume that you're giving this instruction to somebody who has no idea how it all works. You want to assume they don't know anything. So tell them exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. Well, I've received some imagery from, you all, and I've been like sitting on a button going like, when can I share this stuff? And you guys were going back and forth with Coral even. And I was like, I'll wait, because the three of you were doing your thing. And I'm like, I want to share the pretty photo. And, that's a great way to approach it. But at the end of the day, y'all are like, well, hold on. And now John then sent me a message like, okay, go. And, if you look at like Mitch's photo.
Go forth and blast.
Yeah, so we've done some imaging work thanks to Coral, and it's starting to roll out. John, you've noticed some actual numbers and data on our Google business page and how the photo, you can actually see the team there and see those photos. And it's like, hey, look at the numbers on this. And it was like, we were all joking like, yeah, no, it's kind of like Coral knows what she's doing or something.
Well, establishing a standard for what your photography looks like, the typography, establishing all these concrete standards all lend to one central mission: credibility. It makes you look real and like you know what you're doing. And that's one of the main factors that determines whether or not people do business with you or not.
That kind of gets into comfort. Like looking into your brand promise. It's not a prop value. That doesn't mean that. It's not a fancy way to talk about proposition value.
It's not a mission statement.
It's not a mission statement. Thank you for bringing that up. It is not a mission statement. And then also your attributes. You mentioned earlier, like about that, but you didn't say the word attribute, but attributes are like you think of a person or individual. That's the word that you would probably, that's the most dumbed down definition.
Qualities.
Yeah. What's the qualities of that? John's very tactical. John is very, he thinks, he makes lists. There's all these words that I could bring up that are associated that you would put and list out. And I was like, well, that's Jonathan Payne.
Right. A brand has a personality just like a person does. And that's one way, that's a great way to look at your brand. Give me a personality profile of my brand. What are its emotion? What kind of emotions are associated with my brand? What kind of personality traits are associated with my brand? I mean, you want to personify your brand. And that's part of what a brand guide does as well.
Yeah, so we're going to go ahead and leave with that. And then the challenge is after this is if you're listening and you want to leave a comment, in the comment section on YouTube, just go search for NerdBrand on YouTube, like, subscribe, do all those fun things. But in the comments for this episode, tell us if your brand was a superhero, which one would it be?
There you go.
And we'd be very interested because there's some cool movies coming out. We won't get into it because then we'll just run around for hours just talking about those. But think about that. What superhero would your brand be if you had to pick one out of the either Marvel, DC, doesn't matter. Just please don't submit Wonder Twins because that's weird. But
there's a Wonder Twins movie coming.
I know there's a Wonder Twins movie coming out. You can find out that later. Yeah, Robert, I know. He's got a look on his face like, what?
I see the same thing. Something else. Something else. If you've listened to this podcast and you're starting a business, or you have an established business and you've never done a brand guide, what brand guide? What's that? And
it's been 10 years.
Right.
Yeah.
You need an update, or you just have questions. What can I do better to establish my brand, to give my brand a personality, to better flesh out who my brand is and why it should be important to people? We'd love to talk to you.
Yeah. It's not a mountainous, expensive item. There is a cost. Won't lie about that, but it is something that is so important because it's a lot of fun actually to kind of sit with business owners and go watch the light bulbs just light up, like I said, because then they're like,
Yeah.
But
if you're a brand that's had T-shirts made, then turn around and had notepads done, and then had coffee mugs, but then you set those elements up and you look at them and there's something doesn't look quite right. If your logo doesn't look the same on all those elements and it's bugged you, we should talk.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So anyways, you can check out this podcast on nerdbrandagency.com/podcast. There is a singular URL for it now, nerdbrandpodcast.com. But check, I guess, like, subscribe, please. And then
leave comments. We want to know what you think.
And then you can find us everywhere on social media at NerdBrand Agency. And we appreciate everybody that's listened. We are approaching our 100th episode.
Yep.
They're doing something. I don't know. There's something coming special, so watch out for that.
Guess we better get busy.
Yeah, I think you guys better. Yeah,
guess I better think of something.
Yeah, this is like 98.
Got 2 weeks.
You got 2 weeks. All right. Thanks for listening. And remember, everybody, keep your nerd brand strong.